Hello again, and welcome back to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 18 for January 18th, 2020, and we are focusing on Exodus chapters 8 through 10. So today we are looking at several of the plagues that we have during the Exodus story, the so-called 10 plagues, as they are called. But instead of getting nitpicky and just focusing on a few little details within it and basically recounting what each of the plagues are, I'd like to give more of an overview approach by stating how we number the plagues, why the plagues might exist, and be able to talk a little bit about what God is doing through this. So let's look at the plagues as they are brought in order. So the 10 plagues, the first one started off in chapter 7. There, as we saw, that water of the Nile was turned into blood. The second plague is a plague of frogs. The third, plague of gnats. The fourth is a plague of flies. The fifth one is a plague of livestock being diseased. Sixth is boils. The seventh is thunder and hail. The eighth is the locust. The ninth is darkness. And the 10th is connected with the Passover and the taking of the firstborn through that plague. So that one will be discussed in more depth as we look at the Passover and that 10th plague at the next Daily Bread Bible study. But instead of focusing too much on each of them individually, let's talk a little bit about them collectively. So why does God send the 10 plagues? And there's a couple reasons. The first is pretty simple, is that there's a battle between Pharaoh and Egypt and God and the Israelite people. And so this is in fact to show God's supremacy. It's used to increase the reputation of God's people and to decrease the reputation of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So why does that matter? Well, let's think about it in this way. The power that Egypt has is pretty great, and the power of Egypt at this point in time, the new Egyptian ruling government, that it is doing very well for itself. It is the superpower in that region, and everybody else around it has to deal with Egypt being present. So the Israelites are they're pretty much a nobody, a wandering nomadic group that has found themselves in Egypt due to the famine that we looked at in the story of Joseph. But the power of Egypt includes a couple things. It includes irrigation. They're able to take the waters from the floods of the river Nile, and they're able to turn that into a benefit to be able to make sure that the crops are able to grow without much hindrance. So they have irrigation. They also have glass working, which is a new technology in that area. They've got the invention of the 365-day calendar because of their studies of the stars and being able to map that out. They also develop papyrus, which is a predecessor to our modern-day paper, and they use this papyrus by writing on it. They are able to fully utilize that because they create the Phoenician alphabet and are able to log and document their history, their stories, information, keep records. It is pretty impressive for their day and time, as the Hebrew language is predominantly spoken at this day and time. Not recorded yet, physically. They had some other physical infrastructure of roads, which helps out for transportation of goods that they were able to trade and exchange, but they are also able to make sure their armies go out quickly. Along with that, another important invention that they have is the wheel. And the wheel enables the pottery to be made, which you can store things and keep them, better than just putting it in sacks of grain, which is what, Joseph and his family had to do when they were pulling their grain back to go with their families. It enables a lot of transportation ease, that you're able to use carts instead of just having to have beast of burden and throwing the sacks on top of the beasts. It enables construction, the wheel does, because you can get pulleys and levers and ropes in a system. And this is in fact how they built the pyramids, through this construction efforts around the basis of the wheel. And as I mentioned, the wheel helped the armies because they were able to create chariots, which, if you think about it, is pretty impressive. You've got, people who normally fight on horseback. They have a short bow. They have to bounce and adjust as, they're bouncing up and down to shoot. And then with a chariot, you get to stand fully upright. You can hold a long bow, because holding a long bow on the back of a horse is really strange. It's near impossible to be able to do that well. And so you've got these archers who can shoot from further away and hit targets before their opponents on horseback are able to shoot with short bows. So Egypt has it all. They've got everything they need at their disposal. They are at the height of their region, and they are what people look to for these modern, technologically advanced, superior culture in their day and time. They have it all. And so the idea that these Israelites could be able to outthink and overcome these Egyptians is just really absurd. And so we're going to need a lot of help from God in order to be able to do that. So I see the 10 plagues kind of attacking that sense of Egyptian pride, Egypt's, all of their technological advances. And we see that, for example, like when the water is turned to blood, that will mess up their irrigation infrastructure, their watering of, irrigation, that advancement. You'll see that the livestock being diseased, it messes up their transportation needs and, makes it harder. With the boils, it messes up their work system, their caste system of, the people who have boils. The thunder and hail messes up the crops. The locust, if the crops are all destroyed, right, got to eat something else. Why not eat that papyrus as well too? And the darkness, when the darkness overshadows the area, it makes it really hard to be able to study the stars if even in the dark you can't see the stars. So I think there is just a lot of superiority that is coming through this text, and it might not be initially thought of in comparison to the empire of Egypt. Now, the second part is more biblical. It's focusing on, the sense that Pharaoh doesn't want to let his people go. So the second part of the 10 plagues is that it is used to compel Pharaoh and the Egyptians as a whole to let God's people, the Israelites, go. Picking up in Exodus 7, verse 3, and we'll pull from last week a little bit, saying, "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt." And skipping over verse 4, saying, "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out from among them." The Egyptians will know, they will learn who God is. They will see through the signs and wonders, the 10 plagues, that all of this will reflect very poorly on Pharaoh, all of this suffering that is to come. Exodus 8:20 through 21 says, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go so that they may worship me. For if you will not let my people go, I will send blah, blah, blah." And that's usually how it's phrased, with "I will send this plague" or "that plague." It should be noted that, for each of the, kind of 3 plagues, it's usually, this line of "Let my people go, so that that they may worship me. For I will not let your people go. I will send blank," is repeated 2 out of 3 times for each of the plagues, and it's in the first plague and the second plague it's said, but not in the third plague. For the 4th and the 5th plague it's said, but not for the 6th plague. For the 7th and 8th plague it's said, but not for the 9th. And the 10th one is special, so it's not really said for that as well. So it's just interesting that I find that the phrase is absent in plagues 3, 6, and 9. And 10, I can expect it be a little bit different because 10 is different in itself as well. But thirdly, I think the 10 plagues come because it's part of God's promise. It's part of God's plan and God's covenant with his chosen people. And just a reminder, pulling again from some previous parts of Exodus, let's look at God's original plan spoken to Moses in Exodus 3. "I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, don't forget them, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, 'The Lord, the God of Hebrews, has met with us. Let us now go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will perform in it, and after then he will let you go.'" So God is doing God's thing here through the 10 plagues, bringing the suffering for a purpose and not suffering just for suffering's sake. We see that Egypt thinks they're all powerful, but God is in fact supreme. We look and see that that God is able to use this to compel Pharaoh, just as he promises to harden his heart, and the people of Egypt grow tired of Pharaoh, and he has more incentive to let them go instead of chasing them too much, after we will see chasing them to the Red Sea next time. But then God is also faithful to God's covenants as well. So if you find yourself outnumbered and overwhelmed, if you find yourself dealing with somebody who's hardened of heart, if you find yourself hearing God's promises from the past and hoping God will continue to deliver that for the future, look at the Exodus story. Look at these 10 plagues and be reassured that God is in fact going to be present with you. And when we turn and seek to worship him, that God will in fact bless us. So here ends day number 18.